If Napoleon is one of the greatest military geniuses of all time, why did he allow his army in Russia to be destroyed by cold weather, something entirely foreseeable? The paradox of tactical brilliance and strategic ruin. The central dilemma of the Napoleonic era was the attempt to offset a deficit in resources with superior mobility and swiftness, essentially, trying to solve a strategic crisis through tactical achievements. This imbalance eventually leads to strategic paralysis. In the long run, regardless of individual battle outcomes, the side with superior resources typically wins the war of attrition. In Napoleon's case, much like Hitler's a century later, he felt compelled to impose his will to prevent the collapse of the Continental System and enforce the British blockade. He could not bring the British Empire to the negotiating table because London's hopes rested on Russia. While the French possessed the strongest land army of the era, they remained vulnerable when faced with a unified coalition. Rightly suspecting that Austria and Prussia would rejoin the British side the moment they sensed blood in the water, Napoleon seized the initiative and invaded Russia. His goal was to break the backbone of the Russian military before they could officially switch sides. Logistical overreach and political necessity. Historians often argue that if Napoleon had led 300,000 soldiers instead of 600,000, his logistics would have been more manageable. However, it is likely he intended the invasion to appear as a joint European crusade. Furthermore, he could not leave his allies behind, he did not trust them. These nations were only aligned with France due to the strength of Napoleon's bayonets. As Napoleon himself noted, he was a product of war, his power lasted only as long as he provided victories. While he sought to legitimize his rule through the Napoleonic Code and his title as emperor, the old monarchies of Europe viewed him merely as a Corsican general who seized power by force. Ultimately, a continent dominated by a single power was fundamentally incompatible with the European balance of power. The Russian campaign, a preemptive gamble. Napoleon also viewed Russia through the lens of a buffer zone, with his Polish policy being central to preventing a Russian advance into Central Europe. One might consider his campaign a preemptive strike. Private correspondence suggests he did not want to invade Russia but felt forced into it by strategic necessity. Invading in June, the Grande Armée sought a quick, decisive battle. However, the Battle of Borodino came too late. The Russians utilized scorched earth tactics and a disciplined retreat. Even the fall of Moscow failed to break Tsar Alexander's resolve, he preferred to see the city burn rather than negotiate. The myth of General Winter. Historians often oversimplify European defeats in Russia by blaming the weather. In both the 19th and 20th centuries, invaders underestimated the willpower, size, and resilience of Russian forces. It was just as cold for the Russians, they were not fighting in the Bahamas. In reality, the Continental System was failing regardless of the Russian campaign. Napoleon believed he could halt this decline by removing Russia from the equation, much as he had tried and failed to do by punishing Spain and Portugal. The Russian campaign was intended to destroy military capability rather than achieve total conquest, yet Napoleon achieved neither. He lost his army on the Russian plains, and while winter is a convenient excuse, the reality was that the Russians possessed deeper reserves of manpower, including Cossack and Turkic cavalry expert in hit-and-run tactics. Conclusion: the self-fulfilling prophecy. The fundamental failure lay in intelligence and the dance at two weddings dilemma. Napoleon wanted to be the lead dancer at every wedding: Spanish, German, and Russian. While French and 20th-century German generals were perfectly capable of measuring the effects of winter, the decision-makers felt forced to gamble. Had they not invaded, they likely would have been defeated in the long run anyway. The war always belonged to the side with the most resources. Ultimately, Napoleon's fears became a self-fulfilling prophecy. His enemies combined, allied, and destroyed both France and his legacy.